Good morning, Realtors. Today is Friday, April 17th, and welcome back to GADcast, brought to you by the Shore-Barrington Association of REALTORS. My name is Joe Roth, and I'm your local government affairs director with NSBAR. GADcast is the latest podcast offering from NSBAR that will keep you updated on what's happening in the world of realtor advocacy. Each episode will feature a special guest where we dive a little deeper into just how we're fighting for realtors and their clients. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to check out the new 6-video series from Illinois Realtors legal team on the licensed law Relay, as it's often called. It's a really good series hosted by Betsy and Annalise from IR's legal team that covers all the important topics on the significant changes to our licensing law. Definitely a must watch. Check it out at illinoisrealtors.org/legal. And speaking of Annalise, she'll be joining Miss Deborah DeBoer on the premiere episode of EduCast, which will be Wednesday, April 22nd at 8:30 a.m. right here on NSBAR Live. Finally, for those of you listening live, feel free to ask any questions you may have during our presentation through the comments. By now, you've probably heard all about COVID-19 response legislation coming out of Congress. In fact, if you've been paying close attention, you've probably been hearing about this for more than a month. But what you're starting to see is the results of hard work by your realtor advocates in Washington, D.C. In fact, the National Association of REALTORS advocacy team is stacked with as much talent as any industry could possibly hope for. And today's special guest is one of those amazingly talented individuals, Mr. Patrick Wohl. Patrick's our regional representative from NAR. Patrick, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm actually from the northwest side of Chicago, so always glad to speak with folks in Illinois. So thanks for having me.
Represent. I love it. So Congress has passed 3 different stimulus packages in response to COVID-19, and realtors have been represented in each one of those. Can you speak a little bit to how the NAR advocacy team has been able to pull that off and being included at some level in all 3 of these thus far?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's just important to just outline exactly what's been done so far. Like you said, there's been 3 phases of legislation so far, and we're looking on a 4th. The first piece was a relief package that was focused mostly just on healthcare prep, vaccine research, and that sort of thing. Didn't concern our industry too much, but obviously I think legislators were just addressing some of those initial concerns. The second piece was what's called Families First. It was a bill that expanded family medical leave as well as emergency paid sick leave. It allowed people to take up to 12 weeks of job protected leave and then sick leave for 2 weeks. In order to help pay for it too, they put in a payroll tax credit for employers if they're required to grant that leave, and then a tax credit that applies to self-employed individuals, which is obviously important for our members, a lot of whom are self-employed, have their own businesses, or independent contractors. The third phase, and probably the most important one and the one that impacts our industry the most and that's gotten the most attention, is the CARES Act. That's that $2 trillion stimulus piece. And there's lots of stuff packed in here. It's an 800+ page bill. So I'll go through some of the pieces that I know people have been most concerned with. The first are the unemployment benefits that have been rolled out. People are referring to it as the pandemic unemployment assistance. Basically what they did through the federal government is allocate more money to the states. States are the ones who obviously handle unemployment benefits. It's fully managed by either the Department of Labor or the Department of Workforce, depends on the state. I think in Illinois, it's the Department of Employment and Security, IDES. But in any case, the bill provided money for everything, for facilitation of the programs, for state governments. So there's really no reason for people to actually not take advantage of these, for states rather, to not take advantage of these programs. So the most important piece of this unemployment was that it actually applies for self-employed people and independent contractors. This is huge for our members because, as I mentioned before, they would not be included in a lot of these benefits before. And original versions of the bill did not have this included. We were able to get that changed through working through our members, taking advantage of those relationships that we built, and continuing to be a part of the conversation as they move forward. Another big piece here were the SBA loans. There were two loan programs rolled out. The first are EIDL, or EIDL loans. It stands for Emergency Injury Disaster Loans. The program typically provides for, as the name suggests, loans for in the event of natural disaster and other emergencies. And it applies to businesses with less than 500 employees, including sole proprietors. So those people can apply for loans. It's up to $2 million. And what it can be used for is paid sick leave, payroll, rent, mortgage, interest, and those sorts of things. People apply directly through the SBA. I know there's always questions about how to actually take advantage of these. So it's through the SBA for the EIDL loans. And the bill also provided $10,000 forgivable emergency advances for people who are applying. Of course, things don't always work out like they're planned, and that's sort of what we're seeing right now. The SBA and the federal government is sort of building the plane in the air, so to speak. Originally, these grants that I mentioned were supposed to be given within a few days. That's changed. This is a huge, huge program that the SBA is not used to dealing with, this amount of traffic. It's actually one of the smaller branches of government, doesn't have as many employees as others, but they're taking a front seat role right now. So that has caused a bit of a logjam. They've also unfortunately changed how they're actually allocating the money in order to meet some of the demand. There's obviously a ton of people applying for these loans, and so I guess the SBA's view was they want to meet the needs of the greatest number of applicants. So they're conditioning these advanced grants on the actual number of employees. It's 1,000 per employee, and it's capped at 10,000. So that's an unfortunate change that we're pushing back on, continuing to make sure also that funding for that program continues to exist. The second SBA piece here were something that a lot of our members have talked about, some of whom have applied for across the country, and I know it's gotten a lot of attention in the news. It's the PPP loans, the Paycheck Protection Program. This is an extension of the SBA's 7A loan program, which is sort of their flagship program. This is the way, even before the crisis, this program's been around for a long time, but they provided in the CARES Act a huge, huge chunk of money, $349 billion, towards increasing those loans. But unfortunately, as a lot of people have heard, the money has run out as of yesterday. And so that is something I can talk about a little later as we talk about what's actually being done in future packages, but something we're absolutely pushing on that's priority number one because it has run out. And was sort of a two-phase approach on this. Originally, businesses were able to apply first, and then independent contractors had to wait until April 10th to apply. So there was a bit of a disconnect there. So we want to make sure that our folks are able to actually apply for these things and get what was promised. So we're hopeful that will be pushed through. But just to give an overview of what that loans actually entail, as the name suggests, it's intended to cover payroll. And the way it's calculated is by the monthly salary expenditures for a business or an individual from the previous year times 2.5. The loans are given up to $10 million and again, used for payroll. And they're actually forgivable as long as your payroll levels are maintained above 75% of the previous year. As I mentioned, people apply directly through their banks or their SBA lenders. Typically through the 7A loan program, it's done just through a set of 1,800 SBA approved lenders. And this has been actually expanded. The Treasury has allowed some leeway for people to go to different financial institutions, banks, credit unions that wouldn't normally be able to service those customers. So like I said, the money has run out, which is a huge problem. So we're continuing to push on that, and I can talk about that a little more later. The two last important pieces in the CARES Act that relates to our members are the tax changes. Like I said, 800-page plus bill, so apologies for droning around here, but there's a lot of information that's packed into this bill. The first were some changes to retirement withdrawals. So people who were impacted by COVID-19 or have a spouse or dependent who's diagnosed or experiences some adverse financial consequences because of the virus, they can now withdraw up to $100,000 from their retirement accounts, and this includes IRAs, and they do not incur that 10% extra tax or extra early withdrawal penalty. But after that, they have two choices, essentially. They can put the money back into their account over 3 years, or they can keep the money and pay that 10% penalty over 3 years. So big change to retirement withdrawals there. Another piece was an employee retention tax credit. That's for businesses with fewer than 101 employees, as long as they don't take out any of those SBA loans. And it's a refundable tax credit for up to $5,000. This is a little more complicated, as I mentioned, as to how exactly it's taken advantage of, and how you manage your payments to the IRS and that sort of thing. There's lots of great information on NAR's website at nar.realtor about how to take advantage of that and some of the questions people have. Another big piece are delays that are allowed now to FICA taxes, Social Security taxes for employers, and then self-employment taxes for obviously self-employed people. So employers now can delay paying the employer portion of Social Security taxes until after 2020. Or if you're self-employed, you can delay paying half of your self-employment taxes until after 2020. That's because, as we know, a self-employed individual pays both portions, so the employer and the employee, so to speak. Of that 50% that is delayed from those self-employment taxes or your FICA taxes if you're a business, half is due by the end of 2021, and the other half is due by 2022. So in essence, if you think about it, it's sort of like an interest-free loan as long as the money is paid back on time. There are some caveats to it. People who take advantage of the 7A loan program, that PPP program that I mentioned, can't take advantage of this. So obviously, important to check with whoever does your taxes, your accountant, or the IRS has some guidance on that they're continuing to roll out. There's also some changes for who can take advantage of carrybacks and net operating losses. That has been expanded. It was previously in the tax bill from 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They amended the rules for who's actually able to do that. So that has changed and will allow businesses to actually take advantage of some carrybacks and get access to cash. There's also some changes on the amount of business interest that a business can deduct. Previously, it was limited to 30%. Now it's 50% of taxable income. This is particularly important to commercial real estate firms, who we hear a lot about this from. So something that people are paying attention to. The last piece on taxes are the individual rebates. That's gotten a lot of talk today and the last 2 weeks, really, as people are open up their bank accounts and trying to see if the IRS is send them that check from Uncle Sam or from Trump. We know he's putting his signature on them, so I'm sure we'll see that soon. But in any case, essentially what this does, the individual rebates, it gives individuals a $1,200 tax credit or a $2,400 tax credit for joint filers, and then a $500 credit per child. It's, as I mentioned, being sent out now as we speak. If people filed through direct deposit, it'll be automatically put in their account. If they've paid their taxes, or if they've gotten refunds in the past in the mail, though, that'll be mailed out in the coming weeks. And it's based on your 2019 or your 2018 tax returns. One thing to note on this, too, is obviously they phase out. There's lots of good calculators on how much exactly you may qualify for. The rebates phase out for incomes above 75,000 and 150,000 for joint filers. So one huge piece to note, obviously, and when you look at if you might be getting that, and also the IRS will be sending letters to people, so beware of scammers, because that's always something that people experience in these times. The IRS will never contact you about this through the phone and ask for information. So we're just telling folks to be vigilant. The last piece here I'll touch on are just some of the housing changes. The CARES Act included a lot of changes to mortgage forbearance. It applies specifically to borrowers for government-backed mortgages, so Fannie, Freddie, HUD, VA, USDA. People who borrow these can request up to 360-day payment forbearance. They don't need to show proof of hardship, which is an important distinction here. For multifamily property owners, there are some changes as well. As long as the owners of those properties were current on their mortgage payments as of February 1st and they have a federally backed loan, they can request forbearance for 30 days. They do have to show financial hardship. So that is a distinction here. And they can extend this for up to 90 days. However, if they do borrow this, people cannot evict or charge late fees for tenants during that forbearance period. And the last piece that I know a lot of people have heard about is the moratorium on eviction filings for 120 days. And this is on all properties that are in any way touched by the federal government, HUD, Fannie, Freddie, the Rural Housing Voucher Program, USDA, all that sort of thing. So those are some of the main provisions. I know that's a lot packed in there, but like I said, huge bill, really something that is unprecedented right now in this time. And so they're still working through a lot of these guidance, and we're continuing to push on a lot of these things as well.
There is really a lot of information there, a lot of work been done and thought put into not just the entirety of this package, but from a realtor perspective as well, how we've been represented in all of that. And I think there's, when it comes to stimulus checks, I know I check my bank account probably 4 times a day, maybe 6, depends on the time, depends on the day. But we did get a quick question here. I'll jump in with this. There's the question that if people haven't filed their 2018 or 2019 taxes, how is that handled?
Sure. So the IRS has guidance on that on their website. If you go on their website, they have a lot of FAQs because there are tons of different reasons for why a person might not have filed taxes. We've encouraged people to file now if they can, because the deadline has been extended. Tax day, we get to celebrate. Touch on first what NAR is pushing on, and just from a 30,000 foot overview, we are reminding lawmakers really how important the real estate industry is to our country, because obviously as we're paying attention to all sorts of industries that are in need at this time, it's important just to nudge them on how key real estate is to the country. In 2019, it was close to 20% of GDP. That's residential investment in construction, brokerages, commercial real estate, housing services like rent, all sorts of things. So it's a huge, huge part of our economy, which is key for people to remember. And the huge piece too now, as we see all these people file for unemployment, is just the jobs aspect. As of 2 months ago, over 10 million jobs in the United States were directly attributed to the real estate industry. That's a huge piece of the workforce. Not to mention that NAR has 1.4 million members, so we are a huge voice for this and want to continue to be a part of that change. But on the actual things that we're pushing for, the specifics, there's two main pieces right now, as well as some smaller asks that we have. The first is that our main priority is to make sure that there's continued funding and extensions of a lot of the programs that apply to our realtors and brokerages across the country. In particular, the Sba loan program, that PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, those grants, because as I mentioned, there was sort of a divergence from when businesses can apply versus independent contractors. The money has now run out, which is obviously a problem. And so we have highlighted that. We're continuing to push, and I'll talk more about this in a second, but it's looking like that will be included in the next phase of this package. We also want to make sure that the pandemic unemployment assistance, which includes a lot of our members, or rather they are eligible for this, we want to make sure that that funding continues and people can persist taking advantage of that program. And then there are lots of other smaller pieces that I'll get into here. For example, there's a separate bill that won't be a part of any particular package, but we'd like to make its way through Congress on notarization, a bill on notarization, secure notarization online. It's called the Secure Notarization Act. A lot of states across the country do not have laws in the books that allow for online notarization. And obviously, as we are all working from home now, we want to make sure that business operations can continue, that people can have access to a notary. I know Illinois is a state that doesn't have a law in the books, but I believe there was one making its way through the legislature, and Governor Pritzker rather signed an executive order allowing that for the time being. So this is not law in a lot of other states, so it's important as we keep pushing operations here and making sure that people can still go through with closings and that sort of thing. And then internally, there are lots of things that we're evaluating. We're looking at the SALT cap, that $10,000 cap from the tax bill on state and local taxes, which I know is important to a lot of members of NSBAR and that area in Illinois, where property taxes are particularly high. That is a huge piece. So that's something we're paying very close attention to. We're paying attention to infrastructure and broadband. And then on the commercial side, we're also looking at things like that can be done outside of legislation, like expanding some of the deadlines that might apply to certain programs and tax provisions. One in particular is the 1031 like-kind exchange program. Essentially what this is commercial investors can take the property that they have, sell it, and defer capital gains tax on that investment as long as they use the money towards a larger property. But there's some deadlines that apply here. So people have 45 days to find a property and then 180 days to actually go through with the transaction, that swap. And it's obviously hard to meet those deadlines and find properties if you can't even go out of your house these days. So the IRS has extended some of the deadlines. There's a little bit of confusion on that, on exactly when it applies, but they've extended deadlines that might fall from April 1st to July 15th. We're working on guidance on that, a lot of that on our website, and folks can learn more at NAR.realtor. As to what's actually going to be in the package from our view, originally there was a holdup on the Democratic side. Speaker Pelosi and some of the other Democrats in leadership wanted some additional funding for hospitals and things like that. And so I know Speaker Pelosi and the Treasury Secretary and others are negotiating right now. It looks like there will be additional funding for hospitals and personal protective equipment, those PPEs that have been talked about a lot. The initial ask, I think, was $125 billion. We'll see what that ends up being. And then on the PPP side, the ask has been, or what the number is looking like right now, is an additional $250 billion for that program, which is a good chunk. There might be some additional requirements on how exactly that funding is just distributed. For example, there might be some set-asides for community banks and that sort of thing. So we will see how that develops. There's also been a lot of talk about assistance to state and local governments, and it doesn't look like that is likely to be actually in the final package, but we'll see as things develop. There's been a lot of surprises here. I didn't think I'd see a $2 trillion stimulus package passed in my lifetime. Of course, that happened very quickly and on a bipartisan basis. So those are some of the things we're pushing for, and we're going to keep on advocating as this goes forward.
All right. Wow. There's so there's even more in package 4 than I was expecting, which is great. I mean, I think there's and there's just so much going on right now at state, federal, local levels. I know we've been looking here, we're getting some questions as it relates to landlords. And I think it's an important thing that I want to point out here is that, you know, what we're talking about with the stimulus packages are funding and forbearances and things like that for housing providers at a loan level. It relates to their loan, their mortgage on their rental unit. But when it comes to kind of some of the other regulations that are coming down on the local level, things like evictions right now. While the federal guidelines are about evictions for those federally backed funds, we also have statewide orders about not doing evictions. We have, I know Cook County and Lake County both have sheriffs that have said they're not doing evictions right now. So there is a lot of different dynamics at play right now when it comes to housing providers. So just want to put that out at everyone. And we do have a lot of resources that at NSBAR's website, Illinois Realtors website, and NAR's website. And of course, all Illinois Realtors and NSBAR are both linking up to National's website. So kind of a clearinghouse of information for you. And there's a lot of information. So Patrick, right now, it's not business as usual for anyone. And that includes government. But lobbying is a very personal and interactive business. It's a lot of face-to-face. There's a lot of impromptu conversation. So how has the team been so effective at representing realtor interests during these challenging times of social distancing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Certainly things have been upended by people not being able to travel. That definitely complicates things. But luckily the playing field is evened a little bit because everyone is in the same spot here. Everyone's at home. And so that's where really these long-term relationships come into play that the advocacy team has built, both on the state, the local, and the national level from IR and NAR as well. I know you guys have a great team in Springfield as well. So our lobbyists and the rest of our government affairs team, like I said, has been really building these relationships for a long time with maintaining that long-term contact, making sure we're always in touch with people. And I think a huge piece of this too is for a long time, continuing to be helpful to legislators when they're not just asking for things all the time. We try to be a resource for people so that when we actually do have things we need, they'll take our phone calls. So NAR has served as that resource for a lot of members of Congress. We've been a place for them to bounce ideas off and a reliable ally on the campaign front too, through RPAC and a lot of those resources. RPAC particularly makes a difference here with that, building the relationships on the campaign side. Now is really the time that we kick into overdrive and take advantage of all those bonds that we've been able to sustain. And in the end, that's the reason why we're able to get above all the noise. You know, when there's thousands of interest groups clamoring for money and this or that and all these relief bills, our phone calls, our emails, our Zoom meetings, our carrier pigeons, whatever they are, they're answered, they're responded to. People listen when our team picks up the phone and calls, and that can't be said for every organization. So we're constantly in touch with the Trump administration, with the Treasury, with the White House, with leaders in Congress on both sides of the aisle, and people who have been key allies to us on real estate issues for many, many years. And like I said, we're in constant contact, emailing, calling, sending letters on all sorts of issues, working with our coalition partners, whether they be people in the mortgage industry or banking or other housing related groups. We've continued to push that contact, and really it's been those long-term relationships that we've been able to build where we can trust that they'll actually listen to us in this time. And I have to give a big kudos to our members as well, because NAR is so different from other trade associations and really all realtor associations, state and local, and NSBAR and IR, because we have such a robust membership, and we're able to push that out. In particular, we have a huge grassroots program. I know that in your area, I believe the members of Congress are Brad Schneider and Jan Schakowsky. We have awesome FPCs, they're federal political coordinators, Matt Silver with Representative Schneider, and Marilyn Glazer with Jan Schakowsky, who has just a solid relationship. Those two are in awesome touch. They, both those members of Congress, know them personally. They pick up the phone when they answer. These people are the eyes and the ears. And we have folks like Marilyn and Matt in all 435 congressional districts, and of course, for all 100 senators. So these are extraordinary relationships and stories. Some of these people sold members of Congress's their homes. Others went to high school with them. They know their family. I have one FPC who, when her member of Congress doesn't answer her calls, she picks up the phone and calls his mother because they're best friends. So that is the beauty of NAR. That's the beauty of our friends, our members, and our PAC allowing us to be so nimble in these times when we're working from home.
Wow. All right, Patrick, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think you're hitting on something very important here, which is we have a full and robust program here where we are making sure that we can effectively represent not just our interests, but the interests really of our clients as well. And I think that's what this all comes down to. I know we've got a few other questions here, but we're running a little short on time. So I'm going to ask people to follow up with me directly via email. My email is jroth@illinoisrealtors.org, and we'll make sure and get you the answers you need. Patrick, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us today, and we hope you stay well.
Same to you guys. I appreciate you having me on, and of course, if I can ever help with anything, both for folks listening and you guys, you just let me know. We're always there.
Thank you, Patrick. So in 2 podcasts now, we've discussed realtor advocacy in the state and federal levels of government. This advocacy has resulted in support for your businesses and your ability to support your clients. Similarly, local GADs like myself all around the state have been working to make sure you have access to local government services and all the services you need to service your clients. So make sure and join us for our next episode. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these local policies with our very special guest, the legendary Mr. Mike Scobie. Mike has been a local realtor advocate for more than 30 years, and he'll be able to help us shed some light on the latest housing provider regulations in Cook County. Things like the new just housing ordinance, for example. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And until then, be well.